Colombia, there are these insane cathedrals and churches from like the 1600s. They are as beautiful as you would imagine. Once you walk in there, there's vaulted ceilings. I mean, they look 3 stories tall. Domed archways, pillars with these intricate gold detailing, stained glass windows, just reflecting all this colorful light off of these wooden pews. And of course, you cannot forget the beautiful altars with these dripping, melting candles and these complicated, ornate statues at the front. And during the day, it is a place of gathering, reflection, faith, you know? But at night, I think like any building, the last thing you want to hear is someone weeping from inside of one of these cathedrals. In a small town in Colombia, at one of these old churches, there was a man weeping. It's nighttime, the lights are off, he's kneeling on the cold stone floor, he's looking up at the altar, and there's just tears streaming down this guy's face. His face is all scrunched up as if he had just seen something so utterly terrifying, and he's grabbing his fist and he starts banging it on his own chest. And he keeps weeping, mea culpa, which means my fault in Latin. He starts pulling at his hair, he's hitting his head with his fist, obsessively reciting verses from the book of Psalms. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. Their deeds are vile, vile, vile. There is no one who is good, no one who does good. Their deeds are vile. 2 passerbys peek their head in through the door when they hear this weeping, and they're like, who is that? What is going on? Why is this man just weeping in this cathedral? This doesn't make any sense. And the other passerby says, oh, I think that's the new priest in town. This man was the beast of Colombia, the man who performed satanic rituals with dead bodies and Ouija boards. He was the man who sold his soul to the devil, not even figuratively, but he admitted to a transaction. He also kept a little blue book of 221 names, all of the names of the little boys he killed.
221?
That is the low end of the figure. The monster of Genova, otherwise known as the Beast of Colombia, is the serial killer with the most victims. It is estimated that he has at least 221 victims and potentially into the 400s. And this is how he was set to be released from prison this year, 2023. We would like to thank the sponsors of Rotten Mango who have made it possible for Rotten Mango to support Doctors Without Borders, who since 1989, Doctors Without Borders has been providing medical aid in Palestine through medical supplies, humanitarian aid, full-time volunteer medical providers, and emergency medical care. They are currently providing aid in Gaza and the West Bank and hospitals currently under siege. They're doing what they can to support the Palestinian healthcare system that is facing total collapse. The partnerships with Rotten Mango have also made it possible to support our growing team of dedicated researchers and translators while they focus on shedding light on stories from all over the world. And we would like to thank our listeners for your continued support as we work on our mission to be worthy advocates of these causes. And as always, full show notes are available at rottenmangopodcast.com. With that being said, we did have the assistance from our wonderful Spanish-speaking researchers to help gather even more data for this case. But as always with foreign cases, if there's anything lost in translation, something we didn't cover, or you've got some interesting information on this case, please let us know in the comments. And let's get started. 8 boys in a small town in Colombia had lost a finger in a game of hide and seek. None of the 8 boys knew each other. None of them played hide and seek with each other, but they all had matching missing thumbs. But that's not all that's changed about them. It's not like they played one round of hide and seek, came back with a missing thumb, and went about their lives. They all walked around town now like the ghosts of the town. Before, these are kids that were full of energy, full of hope, just bouncing off the walls. Their parents could not keep them still. And now they're flinching at every little noise, every little sound. I mean, they're sticking so close to their parents, and all the color looked like it had been just drained from their faces. And people are wondering, what kind of games are these boys playing these days? You think maybe their finger got stuck in something? Was it a machinery defect somewhere? Some townspeople started whispering it was not an accident. Someone's going around chopping off boys' thumbs. And the boys are now too scared to talk about it. They don't want to tell you who. But why? And who would even do something like that? Like, that's very random to just go around chopping off people's thumbs. Some neighbors heard, I think it's that new guy that moved into town. What did they say he was, like a beggar? The local crazy man? Or no, someone said he was like a priest. Other people said, no. They said he was a witch. Whatever he was just getting started. Police get called out into the woods, where a mass grave of 36 tiny bodies were found.
Whoa.
Children. I mean, it's clear something or someone had killed these children. This is not some sort of self-doing. You don't just have a mass grave of 36 kids. This is not an accident. This also wasn't a bus crash or a plane that crashed into the woods. And they start thinking, the investigators, they're putting their heads together. They've got like no clues to go off of. And the first thought is Pablo Escobar's cartel. They were active in the area. It's a Colombian cartel, and probably one of the most ruthless cartels in all of history. If anyone was capable of doing the unthinkable and killing 36 children, it would be Pablo Escobar's cartel. At the height of the Medellin cartel, they were bringing in over, I mean, this figure is insane. I had to triple check because I'm like, there's no way. They're bringing in $200 million a day in profits. The king of Pablo Escobar was said at his height to be making $2 billion a year in personal income, of course tax-free. At their height, they were supplying 96% of the U.S.'s consumption and controlled 90% of the global market. They basically ruled Colombia, if not the world. Side note, they were also very creative people. Okay, I don't know if they founded this technique, but they definitely made a killing from it. They would soak denim jeans that you wear in liquid. I didn't even know it came in liquid, okay? They would soak it in liquid, dry off the jeans, export them legally through shipping containers into the US, where they had special chemists that would work with them, that would get the jeans, simply wash them with a special liquid compound that would pull out the liquid cocaine and separate it from the rest of the liquid, and then they would dry it into powder cocaine. The cartel learned how to train carrier pigeons to deliver secretive mail to one another as a way to communicate. They had a ton of pigeons around, and it's estimated that they murdered, at the very least, 4,000 people during their reign as the kings of Colombia. Many of them were innocent people. So what is another 36 to them? He said he kept every single threatening note that he ever received from his competitors in a tiny little scrapbook. Because what are these sweet memories if you don't look back at them? He kept them all, like love letters. But the Medellin cartel was ruled out because within the local cities, Pablo Escobar was notorious for being one of the locals' biggest philanthropists, if you will. His favorite cause to donate to was to help children in need.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, he was more generous around Medellin, which is the town he's from, but he does seem to be a bit generous to Colombian children. So it's a mass grave of children. They think it can't be the Medellin cartel. Then could it be the Cali cartel? Another big cartel from Colombia. They operated a bit more secretively than the Medellin cartel. But that didn't make sense because they were known to be a tad bit nicer than the Medellin cartel. Like a tad bit. So Pablo Escobar was known as one of the most ruthless men probably alive. I mean, he's dead now, but when he was alive, this guy was cutthroat. He killed anyone that he even suspected of being against him, even just a stranger on the street. But Cali cartel ran like a business, $1 billion business. They had a Boeing 727 that they would use to fly drugs from Mexico to the United States. They would sell the drugs in the US, load up cash into the plane, fly that plane to Colombia where they would take the money. They made alliances with important people in the transportation industry to be able to pull all of this off. I mean, not only that, they had investors, bankers, lawyers, logistics, exporters, importers, chemists, wholesalers, retailers. They ran their business like a Fortune 500 company. But there were groups of the Cali cartel. There were subgroups where they allegedly believed in social cleansing of discardables. That's what they called them. Discardables were sex workers, street children, petty thieves, gay people, and people without homes. And a subgroup of the Cali cartel believed they needed to die. And so when they were not busy fucking up the whole world, they would go around social cleansing. They believed that these people were ruining their beautiful city of Cali, Colombia, and I don't know if it was a leadership thing, but subgroups would go around killing these people. They would drive around with signs that read, "Clean Cali, Beautiful Cali." They would toss these bodies into a river nearby that was now dubbed the River of Death. And they really hated Pablo Escobar, side note. And when Pablo Escobar was finally imprisoned, they wanted to fly an A-37 Dragonfly, which is an attack aircraft that's produced for the US Air Force. I don't know how they got their hands on one, but they planned to drop a bomb on the whole prison to finally eliminate Pablo Escobar once and for all. And you're like, that's a crazy plan. It's just a plan though, right? They got as far as to trying to load the bombs onto the jet, but there was a crowd forming. So they had to leave. But they got the bombs. They got the jet, they got the bombs, and they were ready to go bomb a whole prison for Pablo Escobar. But the mass grave was not in Cali, Colombia. So the detectives, they're thinking, this doesn't make sense. Even the social cleansings that the subgroup of the Cali cartel would do, they were never at this scale. They were never mass grave levels, and they were never really outside of the city of Cali. And cartels, they typically don't just go out and kill a group of children. Typically, if they do target an innocent child, it's done because they're targeting their adult family members. Then the next assumption was, if it's not trafficking, it could be organ trafficking. Colombia has become one of the biggest markets for black market organ transplants, causing what they call now to be organ tourism. So it's where desperate foreign patients come to Colombia for an organ transplant that would be considered impossible if not illegal in their home country. To give context, recently, a 6-year-old girl had been kidnapped and sold to organ traffickers for $16,000. The World Health Organization believes that about 10,000 kidneys are traded on the black market worldwide annually. That's about one black market kidney sold every single hour. And there's estimates. Kidneys can go anywhere between $20,000 to $60,000 a kidney, and that's just for the kidney itself. That does not include the operation. Terrifyingly, they will sell corneas, they will sell eyes for $30,000. Livers go for up to $50,000 to $100,000, and hearts and lungs go for about $150,000. Now, most of the time, the traffickers, or they call themselves brokers, they make all the money. There are some markets where victims willingly give up their kidneys for money, but they only get $2,000 for their kidneys, while the brokers are taking home $18,000 to $58,000. For the other organs, like the heart, the lungs, the parts that victims need to survive, they're either doing this because they have no choice, they've been kidnapped, or potentially their death is the only way that their loved ones can live. But they're not even gonna get $150,000 out of that. They'll get a tiny percentage. It'll probably be closer to like $15,000 to die. It's estimated that the illegal organ trade generates about $1.7 billion a year. So investigators are thinking, that makes sense. 36 kids and, children's organs, they could be more valuable on the market. But a lot of the victims in the mass grave, they had cuts on their stomach, and their private parts, they were missing. So, okay, maybe it could be organ trafficking, but no. Once they looked closer, they realized that all these cuts were made incredibly messy. Organ traffickers, they are precise with their cuts. Nobody wants a tainted organ. So that doesn't really make any sense now. The authorities then move on to the theory that answers any and all questions that they have. Maybe it's Satanism, they say. Maybe it's people who practice witchcraft. That would be the only thing that makes sense. Nothing else makes sense at this point. There was clear evidence of torture. Many of the victims were decapitated and had their right foot chopped off. Why would they have their right feet dismembered, but still left behind at the scene? That doesn't make sense to investigators.
Only right foot?
Only right foot.
And it's still there.
Yeah, they don't take it with them, they just leave them. It doesn't make any sense. Does it? Lewis hated when people had what he couldn't have. It was like a thing. He always had been like that. Even when he was a kid, he was the oldest of 7 kids, and he hated any single person in his school that had a normal family. Genuinely despised them with this burning hatred. So Lewis had grown up in a small town called Genova, Colombia. And Lewis's dad, he is very much men rule the world, but more importantly, only I rule the world. That's his thinking. So it doesn't matter if it's his son or his daughter, none of them are allowed to go out, none of them are allowed to talk unless he permitted them to. He was an alcoholic that spent all day at the bar spending up the family's money, and when he comes home, his whole family would hide under their beds. That's not even an exaggeration. They would hide under their beds because Lewis's dad had a temper. Whenever someone got on his way physically, he would blow up. And they've got a really small house with 9 people. Everyone is always in everyone's way. His way of saying, "Excuse me, could you please scoot over?" was just taking off his belt and whipping you. Yeah. So if Lewis's mom didn't have dinner ready on time, which this guy never comes home at the same time, so I don't know how she's expected to predict that he's going to be home at certain points, but if she doesn't have his meal hot and ready for him, she would get beat. And as the eldest son, Lewis would try to stop his dad from beating his mom. But he tried a few times. The punishments were really bad. Lewis's dad would strap him up to a tree trunk, and he would beat him with a machete. I don't know how he would hit him with the back of the machete, or if he's just kind of beating him like on the side with the machete, or if he's practicing small, shallow cuts with the machete. It's very unclear, but it was a machete.
Y esa correa con él nos pegaba duro. Y nosotros no podíamos, digamos, jugar ni nada. Éramos totalmente, no me pude desarrollar como niño, ¿sí me entiende?
Eventually, Lewis would stop trying to protect his mom because at one point he felt like, well, mom's never gonna leave and I keep getting beat for no reason. And that's just how it was. At one point, Lewis's dad did attack his own wife with a knife. She ended up staying, probably not because she wants to, but from a socioeconomic standpoint, she would be destitute and her kids would be in danger. So she stayed, and Lewis stops protecting her. When Lewis would get beaten up, he would show up to school the next day with these massive red welts on his bottom, on his butt. He would be unable to even sit down because of this pain, and he would look at all the other kids that could sit down, that were so excited to go home after school because their parents loved them, and he hated them. He genuinely despised them for having what he didn't have. So he kind of tried to bully them. He wasn't really that successful. Okay, so do you know what a procedural memory is? They're procedures that the brain has learned and can be activated without conscious thought. If someone hands you a piping hot cup of tea, without even thinking about what you're doing, you might grab the cup. You might blow on the tea so it cools down. You might take a sip without consciously deciding, I'm going to blow on the cup and I'm going to take a sip.
It's like a memory, body memory.
Yes, like muscle memory. And usually it's reserved for things like driving, riding a bike. But Lewis, all of his procedural memories were dedicated to, okay, if somebody pisses me off, I'm going to pummel them with my 2 fists. Like any emotion he felt, it was almost like a trigger response. Emotion, 2 fists up in the air, swinging. I mean, I guess he saw his dad do it so often, he felt like this is just what happens. Emotion A leads to action B. He would beat up his classmates for something as little as accidentally using his pencil. So you would think, okay, Lewis is the biggest, baddest boy in class. But he wasn't. He would actually get bullied more than he was the bully. He wore glasses and he got bullied for that. And his last name is Garavito, which sounds like Garabato, because the V and the B in Spanish, our researchers were telling me, don't really sound different. So it's more like Garabato, Garabito.
Okay.
Garabato means doodle. Yeah, the soon-to-be world's deadliest serial killer, Lewis, in his grade school, was bullied for being Lewis the Doodle Boy. It's a very interesting bullying
Doodle
experience.
doesn't sound that bad, does it?
I don't think so. I think it's more like chicken scratch, scribble, squiggle.
I see. Okay, I see. Okay.
So he's jealous of the kids at school because they have normal families, normal dads, and normal last names. And then Lewis's dad touched him. Lewis said one night his dad forced him to be bathed by him, which at this point he's no longer a toddler that needs to be bathed by his parents. He is more than old enough and capable enough to bathe himself, but his dad is insisting, and it's either this or the belt. So Lewis sat there uncomfortably in the bath while his father bathed every inch of his body. He said nothing else happened, but that memory is just so crystal clear for him. And then it happened again, but this time with Lewis's dad's friend. He came over to the family house pretending to hang out with Lewis's dad, but he would get Lewis alone, tie him up, brutally assault him. So now he's getting essayed. Afterwards, and this is very specific, but this family friend would go get a candle. He would use the flame of the candle to burn the very sensitive parts of Lewis, including the hairs on his private parts. And usually it didn't just stop there. The family friend would then use his mouth to bite Lewis where he was the most sensitive. And these are not nibbles, they're full-on chomps. He would bite down and watch Lewis cry out in pain while he would simultaneously satisfy himself. This happened over and over again for 2 years. Thankfully, the family moved away, so the family friend was no longer in their lives, but they made a new family friend. And this time he was a priest. Clearly, Lewis is being traumatized from the abuse. But more than anything, he was just so angry and jealous that his assaulters had what he didn't have, which was power. You know that saying, 2 birds, 1 stone? Mm-hmm. Lewis took it so literally. When he was done being assaulted by his dad's family friend, he grabbed 2 birds. I don't know how he caught them. He grabbed a stone and pummeled them. He said that he, quote, tore them apart, ripped them apart, completely mangled these 2 birds. And that made him feel very, very good. There are 7 stages a killer goes through to become a serial killer. And these phases are typically very different, and they're used to profile serial killers versus murderers, because most murderers, they will kill from emotions that probably you and I not understand, because it's not like we're justifying their actions, but these are emotions that most people feel, just not to the point of being homicidal. You feel angry at times, you feel jealous, fear, these types of things. But for serial killers, they kill for the thrill. And there's just no way that we can even try to grasp that, like try to wrap our heads around something like that. They live their lives so that they can take lives. That's it. The first phase is the aura phase. This is when the killer starts to create this aura around him, this almost border, distance themselves from social relationships and people. They start pulling away from family and friends. They retreat into their own little fantasy world, where they start having, in most cases, very violent thoughts. And there's nobody around them for them to confide in, to tell them, hey, you think this is weird? No one. They're alone. Lewis was never allowed to have friends, so that wasn't really a thing. He was never close with his family, and after his continuous assaults by family, friends, and priests, he's already fantasizing about turning the tables and returning the pain that he felt to a random innocent boy. That is his fantasy. The second phase is the trolling phase. That's what it's called. And it usually consists of the killer kind of toying with the idea of killing a little bit more. Instead of just having fantasies, they start thinking of, well, what would the process look like? And who would it be? And how would I really go about it? They're not sitting there taking notes and coming up with a full plan. Not yet. That's a different phase. But they're kind of thinking a little bit more realistic. How am I going to implement this into my life? Lewis was the oldest of 7 kids, and one day, like a drill sergeant, he's lining up his little siblings. He's yelling, get in line, get in line. Males and female siblings, okay? They're really young. Lewis himself is only 15 years old. He forces them to line up, strip down of all their clothes, and from there, he goes one by one, slowly caressing them. He describes it as, and I quote, a light, smooth touch. Just like tracing his hands on them. He claimed that's all he did. Other sources claimed he would take it a step further and force his siblings to sleep unclothed in the same bed as him, and when they were asleep, he would touch them. But we are unsure. Now we enter into the third phase. This is kind of the flirting phase. There's a slight difference between the trolling phase and the flirting phase. I don't think the flirting phase is a great way to label it, but I'm not the one that came up with these labels. It's when a serial killer is in this hyper-focused mode of trying to find the perfect victim, trying to kind of flirt with the victim, gain their trust, toy with the idea of how and where to kill that particular victim. So they're narrowing it down to a group of people that they want to target. More concrete plans are being made in this phase. They're literally flirting with the idea of killing, which is terrifying to think about.
Who came out with these 7 steps?
A bunch of profilers.
Oh,
yeah.
I see.
But what's interesting? A lot of different serial killer profilers have different methods. Yeah, there's a couple of things that they all go by. I saw that some people don't use these 7 stages. Some people do. So I guess it really depends, right? Now, Lewis is in his 20s. And you would never in a million years think that this man is flirting with the idea of becoming a serial killer if you met him. He's working at a bakery. He's baking loaves of bread. He goes to church every single Sunday. He even attended AA meetings to address his relationship with alcohol. Middle-aged women would come down into the bakery, buy a loaf of bread, and shove pictures of their daughter in Lewis's face. And they knew that he was an alcoholic, but a lot of men in this town were. At least Lewis is working on it. He acknowledged it, and he looks kind of cute. He wears those 80s style big eyeglasses. And I'm not saying that to compliment him. I'm saying, this is the older lady's perspective. He's baking cakes for a living. He goes to church on the weekends. He does occasionally get very angry with the bakery owners, so his bosses, And he would occasionally punch them in the face a couple of times. But other than that, he was a complete catch. A lot of these moms, I'm sure they didn't see him punch his bosses. The moms, they would already have 2 loaves of bread at home, but they were just stopping by to buy another loaf, begging Louis, hey, my daughter is single. Louis would politely decline, and he said, maybe later. I've got a lot on my mind right now. Louis had started assaulting little boys in the park. Now, he would hide in the bushes with his machete, and if he saw a little kid walk by alone, he would jump out and yell, "Don't say anything or I'll kill you." One of his earlier victims, William Trujillo, he said that Louis forced him out of his clothes and did everything to him, everything including torture, biting him painfully all over. But he said the worst part was that he was so silent doing everything. Like completely silent. It was terrifying and disturbing. And his stench, William said, "Do you know what a farm worker smells like after a day of work? That's what he smelled like." William was tortured and held captive in that park for 12 hours. And even in his earlier crimes, it's clear Louis likes the mental torture aspect of all of this, because William remembers finally gaining the courage to talk, and he asked, "Sir, when will you be letting me go home?" And there was silence. And finally Louis spoke and said, "When the bells ring." The church bells ring at 5 in the morning. He had already been there for like 10 hours. William had to wait for what feels like an eternity, and he didn't even know if the man was telling him the truth or he was lying to him. And right at 5, the church bells go off. Louis slowly releases his grip and says, "Go ahead." And William books it. He runs off. The 4th phase that serial killers typically take is the capturing phase. And Louis was capturing a ton of children. About 200 children were captured by Louis, brutally assaulted, and ultimately released. So these 200 children are not even his murder victims. So just think about the sheer amount of victims that he has in his lifetime.
Wow.
Now, quick disclaimer, I don't feel like we need to, because everyone here are reasonable, intelligent people, but Louis is a male killer who targeted boys. And if that makes anyone think that there is a link between being gay or bisexual and being a serial killer, there should be some, critical thinking comprehension classes out there that should probably urgently be looked into. So this has nothing to do with sexuality. I do see a lot of people kind of point out the link between the extreme Catholicism that he was raised in, where homosexuality was like a cardinal sin, and then him being assaulted as a kid and then developing these attractions towards a certain gender. I don't know. I feel like a killer is a killer, And we can kind of argue these things, but at what point is it just... Now, Louis would go to the park with candy, drinks, toys, whatever he thought he could entice little boys with, and he would wait for these boys to walk by. Sometimes he would use candy to be like, "Come here, you want some candy?" Literally. That's what he would do. He would lure them with candy. He would then string them along to a secluded area of the park, tie them up, and torture them. A lot of experts believe that he was experimenting with torture since his essays as a kid involved a lot of physical pain. So he started cutting victims with razors, shallow cuts all over their bodies. Then he tried deeper cuts, but he didn't really like that, so he just did shallow cuts. So this would go on for 12 hours at a time. He very quickly learned he had to be mindful that his torture tactics didn't kill the victims, because he wanted his victims alive, because that's the whole fun of it. He brought candles into the park. He would light them on fire to burn his victims, just like he had been burned as a kid. He would bite the victims all over their bodies, beat them, and he would pummel his victims, a full-grown adult targeting 5-year-olds, and he would assault them. Louis was disorganized, yet organized. He was very disorganized in almost all other aspects of the crime, but when it came to the torture, he was very methodical. The torture almost always happened in the same order every single time. It's like he had created the perfect cycle to maximize his sick pleasure. And when he was done, he would let them go, rush home to write their names down in this little blue book of his. And this is the part that just really makes this case an anomaly. But for 12 years, Louis was in this phase, toying with the idea of murdering for 12 years, essaying hundreds of kids, torturing them, hundreds of them. And I say anomaly not just because he was in this phase for 12 years, but also the fact that he wasn't put behind bars before he committed his first murder, when he is out there committing some of the most atrocious crimes that we've researched, is just crazy. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. I also do really want to disclaim, we really wish that we could share more of who the victims were, what they were like, but unfortunately, there just aren't that many stories of Lewis's victims out there. I was provided some context by our researchers, and they stated, when a boy went missing in Colombia at the time, the most likely reason was either being a victim of a gang, cartel, or a paramilitary group, or maybe they left home due to extreme domestic violence from the parents. Most parents did not file missing persons reports because a lot of them were just straight up scared. If we went to the police, and most police forces are run by cartels, and the cartel took our kid, we report it to the police who the cartel controls, then our child would be in even more danger. What if they think that our child snitched or we're causing too much trouble to keep the child alive? As for Lewis's assault victims, even if they came home and told their parents what had happened, parents felt like going to the authorities was just not an option. Not only was justice rarely ever served for cases like this, their child is now going to be subject to life-threatening social shame. And all for what? To not get justice? And just victimize their kid even further? A lot of Lewis's victims are still not identified to this day. And now that's both his assault victims and later his murder victims. After 12 years, he would escalate into phase 5, murder. Mind you, he already has 200 victims in his little blue notebook. This is before killing. Before he starts killing, he's got 200 victims. And his first kill was almost on a whim. He said that he was drunk, he left a bar and decided, you know what, today is the day. He went, bought a pack of cigarettes, a cord, a knife, and a cheap bottle of brandy. He stumbled into the park, waited for a boy to be lured in. He kept holding out change in his hand to see if any boy that passed, he'd be like, hey, do you want some money? This is an area where a lot of children go out and they try to work because they need to bring food home for the family. Of course they want money. Typically, they would ask, what kind of job are you offering? Do you want me to shine your shoes? Do you want me to sell candy on your behalf, run errands? Lewis would tell the boy, no, you can just take a walk with me. Lewis grabbed his hand and led him into the wooded area of the park. And this park connects to a huge, mountainous area that surrounds the city. And once it was secluded enough, Lewis tied the boy up. Like the 200 victims before him, he bit him everywhere, and then assaulted him. But he said that he just felt this anger. He said it was the strongest impulse of his entire life, and it was the impulse to punch this boy. So he sat on this boy and quite literally beat this boy to death with his bare hands. The boy cannot get up. And then he walked off, covered in blood. Nobody stopped him, whether nobody saw him or they minded their own business, I don't know. But he went home, took a shower, grabbed his little notebook, to write down another name, but this time in a new section. Phase 6 is a phase that sets serial killers and murderers apart, which is serial killers typically take trophies. So unlike killers who kill for life insurance, love, greed, revenge, they usually want to get rid of anything that ties them to the crime. Serial killers, they want that connection open. They want to go back and reminisce about that moment. They want to relive it. Lewis had his little blue notebook, but later he would rummage through the victim's pockets. He's typically looking for some sort of student ID, and if he found it, he would sit there and cut out just the pictures of the boy. So he would never bring home the full student ID, just the picture part. If he didn't find a student ID, he would just take their underwear. Later, they would all be found folded up in his drawer right next to his own underwear. He would also sit there in his house, clipping any newspaper headlines about his crimes. I mean, he really loved his trophies. And then the last phase is the depression phase. Once Lewis was done with his first kill, like most serial killers, he fell into a state of depression. For some serial killers, this includes the feeling of guilt. Lewis said he was so disappointed in himself, which is honestly such a weird way to describe it. I get disappointed in myself all the time, but for small mistakes. He's disappointed in himself because he killed someone. It feels like such a light word to use, but he said he was so disappointed in himself, he walked himself into church, wept in front of the statue of Jesus, and he just cried. If I'm being honest with you, I don't think that this man really felt guilty.
So what exactly does that mean? When he say he feel depressed and cried and go to church, like what is that?
I think it's a procedural memory. So he was raised devout Catholic family, and anything that he did wrong or he perceived as wrong, he was forced to confess. He was forced to cry. That's how you get rid of your sins. So if there was a part of him that still had any of that faith that he needed to be saved, this was purely for that, I believe. It was narcissistic. It's, I want to be saved. I want to go to heaven, so I need to confess to my sins. I don't think there was genuine remorse, because it's hard to imagine he feels even a little bit guilty, but still went on to kill 220 more times.
So he did that, and then he continued, and so it's like a back and forth and back and forth.
Every time after a kill, at least for the first, I don't know, dozens, he said that he would go to church and just cry because he was so remorseful. I truly don't believe he was remorseful at all.
Yeah.
You know, I think that these outbursts of emotions are just procedural memory, that part of his brain that's lighting up again. Or I think that it's just some sort of narcissistic tendency to make this whole fantasy feel even more real and complicated. This is purely speculation. A lot of serial killers have some sort of personality disorder that makes them unable to feel human emotions or empathy. I mean, they feel human emotions such as anger, but they don't feel empathy. So a lot of them will mirror people. And I wonder if this is him mirroring what he thinks is expected after something like this. Because I genuinely don't think that he's sorry at all.
Yeah.
When he was 23 years old, he did end up going to a psychiatrist. And this is why I think that he's a little bit dramatic.
Wait, he's only 23 right now?
Yeah.
Wait, you say it's been 12 years? So,
Yeah.
Oh, he started when he was, wow. Okay.
And he would go on for like another, like 2 decades. This part, I don't know how else to describe it, so I'm just going to try to describe it the way that I think people will understand the message the best. I'm not trying to like trivialize it, but I feel like he is kind of dramatic in the sense that he wants these main character moments. I think that's part of his weeping at church after the kills. Because listen to this. He goes to a psychiatrist in his 20s, and he gets diagnosed with reactive depression, which typically indicates that someone has significant distress that is oftentimes out of proportion to the severity or the intensity of the external stressor. So this type of depression is triggered by something that happens in their life. It's reactive. They have a big life event, and now this person does not feel like they can handle the stressors of life, so they feel depressed. So if someone steps on another person's foot by accident and this person has reactive depression, a normal reaction would be feel physical pain and potentially a little annoyance. In Lewis's case, his mind would send him off the rocker. Reactive depression is usually temporary, meaning once the situation that the patient lives in, this external situation, improves, the reactive depression also improves. Or if the external circumstances persist, the patient does not develop a way to cope, then it develops into chronic depression. And this is not to say that reactive depression isn't very painful and very real and potentially life-threatening, because it can develop into chronic depression, which can end someone's life. But reactive depression is typically not classified as a high-risk diagnosis. But of course, it's case by case, and it could very quickly evolve into something that's more high risk. Lewis gets told that he has reactive depression. He claimed he wanted to end it right then and there. But then he never would. You know, and he just like kept telling people in interviews later on that it just made him really depressed to have reactive depression. Because later, his reactive depression, some psychologists stated, did evolve into clinical depression or chronic depression, right? So he's claiming he's very depressed. He would go down to his therapist, feel even more depressed because his therapist is like, you're depressed. Then he would go to AA meetings, feel extra down because he's an alcoholic. And then that night, he would go to a bar, get drunk, and then try to kill someone afterwards. And he just kept using the excuse that he was sad and depressed. Like, I say this with such not really much sympathy because I feel like so many of us are sad and depressed and none of us go out there and commit heinous acts of violence. So I don't even know if that's really what he claims. He's doing this because he's all sad. He's sad, and then he kills, and then he goes to church because he's so sorry. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, none of this is making any sense. And then he said he would feel sad after a kill, and he would start thinking back to the last time he felt any sort of happiness, and that was while he was committing his crimes. He stated that he would start flipping through his little blue notebook and pleasuring himself at the memory of his crimes. And he realized in order to feel happy again, he would have to kill again. And these kills would only get more gruesome. So he would punch the victims all over. He specifically would target their hands, which this part, I mean, if you've been around younger ones, you know how their hands are so small. It feels like a natural universal feeling to see a child's hand and want to protect them. Lewis would specifically target these hands. He would punch them until he shattered the bones in the hands.
Jeez.
He would punch and slice them on their bottoms as well. He would try to lightly stab into their kidneys. He said that he chose to stab near the kidneys specifically because he realized that there's not a lot of, he thought, major arteries in that area. So victims would typically not bleed to death before he was done with them because he wanted them alive for a very, very long time. The final acts of torture included him slitting their throats while actively assaulting them. And then when he was done, he would decapitate them. He would cut off their private parts and place their private parts into their mouths of the decapitated heads. This was almost his signature, and I'm not saying that as a figure of speech. Serial killers typically have something called an MO. Now, an MO is how they operate. This is how they find victims, trap victims, kill victims, and then dispose of their bodies. A signature, these are words profilers use, I'm not calling it a signature, is something that is almost unchangeable for each serial killer. It's an action or something that is done during the kill that indicates this is why they're committing these crimes in the first place. This might be the ultimate action. It's not the kill itself. This could be where we need to look into. It's a signature for a reason. So MOs, they typically evolve, they change. Serial killers adapt, they find new techniques. A signature usually stays the same. It reflects a deeper psychological reasoning behind these kills. And him placing the victim's private parts into their own mouths was a bit of a signature for Lewis.
So that's not an MO.
No. Later his MO would evolve and he would add a lot more steps to this process before his victims were dead. He would take a screwdriver to gouge out their eyes and their ears. Sometimes he would use a knife or tool to detach the fingers from their hands. He would use tools to detach their right feet from their legs. Then after the torture, he would cut open their stomachs while they were still alive, open and remove all of their intestines, and place them next to their face on the ground. The victims would be alive to see their intestines laying in the grass next to them, which is something that is technically medically possible. If someone's vital organs like their heart and lungs remain untouched and the laceration cuts on the stomach do not hit any major blood vessels, it's said that someone who is disemboweled can actually remain alive for several hours in immense shock and pain. Then once he was done with that, he would finally decapitate them and move on to commit his signature. And this whole process would take hours, if not half a day to a full day. Lewis was also a chain smoker, and he would take smoking breaks in between the acts of torture. It's stated that sometimes he smoked an entire pack of cigarettes during his kills. Back then, cigarettes in Colombia were exclusively sold in packs of 20, and on average, it takes 6 minutes to smoke a cigarette. So that's at least 2 hours of him just pausing to smoke. 2 hours of extra torture that the victims would have to endure. Lewis tried not to kill too late at night, mainly because he said he was scared of the dark. But sometimes it was unavoidable, and that was fine for him. There was another thing that Lewis was starting to get scared of, and it was the idea of getting caught. He had been an active serial killer in the area for years now, potentially even a decade at this point, and only just recently, people started noticing. People started hearing the whispers around town. Mothers would be pulling their kids closer to them while they were running errands. And then there was that incident. He had just finished murdering another victim when someone had apparently seen him attacking the kid in the woods. He hears the police coming. The victim wasn't dead yet. He quickly finishes, does what he does, flees as fast as possible, and breaks his leg in the escape. The witness did not see what Lewis looked like, so he had a close call, but he would get off without a charge. And the only thing that angered him was that now, because he broke his leg, he had a limp on his right foot. And that right foot would never be the same. And he hated seeing people with perfectly healthy right feet.
So that's why he chopped. Wow.
A lot of people speculate that he started gouging out the victim's eyeballs because his eyesight was deteriorating. He was having problems with his eyes. Now, this added a little bit of anxiety to Lewis's life, and there was the situation of the 8 boys with the missing thumbs. He went from assaulting boys, torturing them, letting them go, and then into killing boys. But during his kill phase, he actually let 8 of his victims go. And that would haunt him forever. And it's not because he messed up. It's not because he thought, oh, let me just let these kids go because they said something that I liked, they did something that I liked, he felt sympathy. It wasn't that. He thought it would be more fun. He was experimenting. So he chopped off each of their thumbs, cut the cords off of them, and let them free after hours and hours of torture. And he said, I'm going to count to a random number in my head. If you make it back to your family alive before I catch you, then you get to live. At this point, the boys are already running. He never even chased them. He just set them free. Now, there are theories about why he would do this, and it's not because he had remorse for these 8 boys, but the general theory is that, well, he was trying to see if it was going to give him some sort of sick satisfaction to know that these boys would never live a single day without thinking about him, and they would live the rest of their lives in utter terror. And that itself is a very strong form of torture. He did this to 8 little boys, so 8 little boys in Colombia were traumatized by him and forever mutilated with missing thumbs.
Why the thumb?
I guess he was trying to start another signature for this part.
Is it because he can see which one
Maybe.
is his victims?
Yeah, it's pretty easy to see, I guess, yeah.
Wow.
And that could be very, very true because he only operated in like 10 to 15 towns. Pretty small towns too. But now these 8 boys were keeping him up at night. They had seen his face for hours. They had heard his voice for hours. They knew what he looked like. They knew what he smelled like, everything. Like, what if they went to the police? He was annoyed with himself, and he vowed never to let another one go ever again. And he made adjustments to his MO as insurance policies. He always wore shoes that were one size too big. And he made sure that no boy could get away now. There would be no 9th boy without a thumb, alive to tell the tale. But he was also tweaking his method to make it more efficient. Efficient in terms of how to make the torture last longer for him so that he can get the pleasure, but not waste his energy on other things. So he came up with this method where before the torture and before the attack, he would chain up his victims with some sort of rope or cord, and he would force them to walk around in circles while he held out a machete near their necks. They were made to walk in circles until their legs shook. This part of the process took hours in some cases.
Wait, what does that mean? Their leg shook.
They're walking in circles nonstop for hours until their legs are shaking because they're so tired.
Oh.
The whole time he's yelling at them about how he's going to kill them. They're all dead meat. He's going to bite their privates off. He's detailing every single act of visceral torture that he's about to commit on them. And this was 2 birds, 1 stone for him. It was pleasurable for him to see his victims shake in fear, but it was also to tire them out so they had no chance of fighting back. They were genuinely so out of energy. Not that they even had a strong chance of escaping before this, because it's a full-grown man against 7-year-olds, but this was his insurance policy. Lewis did satanic rituals with the bodies. There's not much credible information on what the rituals consisted of, but we do know that he used a Ouija board with the dead bodies, and he was very excited to make a deal with the devil each time he killed. This is why I think that the whole church thing is nonsense. I think it's nonsense. I don't think he's religious. I don't think he's remorseful. He said the first time he sold his soul to the devil, it was a feeling he would never forget. He said, "It turned out that when I made a pact with the devil, a voice moved the curtain, my hair stood up on the ends, and I entered into a psychotic state where I heard a voice tell me that it loved me. I said I wanted power, and it said it wanted to serve me. It said, I want to serve you, sir. I sold my soul to the devil, and that's how it went."
Cuando yo en un libro de magia negra que me ha traído de un señor de por allá me trajo, me lo vendió, leo yo cómo se manejaba la tabla Ouija y empiezo yo a meterme en las profundidades del satanismo y yo vi en esa obsesión que tenía por poder y por dinero que esa era como una opción muy buena.
He would think about that joyous moment as he made his victims walk in circles. Detective Mark Duran was assigned to this case, and he was walking in circles with his team. They knew way too late that they had a serial killer on their hands. Even the mass grave, they genuinely weren't even thinking of a serial killer. Because remember, they're thinking of a cartel, a different cartel, organ trafficking, satanic cult. Serial killer, they not even on their minds. And now they're too late. Now they're trying to track the killer's movements, but it's all over the place. They're literally going in circles. New neighboring cities, new towns, just when they thought they were gone or dead, the serial killer, a new body would turn up. Every person he asked saw something. Town-goers were saying, no, he was a priest. You have to look at the churches, he was a priest. Others said, no, he was a beggar. There was a suspicious guy. I think he's the killer, and he was a beggar. But he left town.
Everyone knew it's him.
A lot of people knew what he looked like, but they couldn't really pinpoint him.
Oh, okay.
And he jumped from towns. So it's not like he was staying in one town and Mark is like, oh, let me go find this guy. You know, it's like now we don't know where he went and the townspeople are telling me, oh, he was like a beggar. We don't know a name. We don't know anything. This is kind of what he looked like. No, he looked like this. And people are like, no, that's the different beggar. It was just so many different sources. People are like, yeah, go look for people without homes. He's a beggar on the street. They're like, actually, he's a monk. You got to go to the temples, and that's where you're going to find him. Or people are saying, no, you're not going to find him at all. He works with dark magic, and he's a witch. It was clear to Detective Mark that the killer assumed a new identity with every town that they went to, and maybe even with every person that they met. Who's to say that they only had one identity each time they went to a new town? I mean, that's the interesting thing, though, that Detective Mark realized were the types of personas he would take on. Priest, a generally respected position. You are in a position of authority. But then the next town over, he'd be a beggar, a generally looked down upon position. Not my personal feeling, but the harsh reality of society. You're in a position of vulnerability. You are likely ignored, discarded. People don't want to look at you. They don't want to make eye contact with you. The local crazy man was another persona he took on. Generally, again, another looked-down person in society. And then a practitioner of witchcraft? This one is a mixed position. Either people will look at you with respect, fear, or they will look down on you. I mean, I guess depending on their own personal beliefs. One would imagine that this type of guy wants to be in a position to be revered and respected. That's what serial killers want, right? To have that immediate authority over people. But no, he chose all sorts of random personas. And Mark's team initially were very confused about it. But Mark wasn't. He knew what the killer was doing. All these personas have a few things in common. Can you guess?
Beggar and the priest. People don't want to talk to them. Is that right?
They are held at a distance by general society. As much as you might respect a priest or practitioner of witchcraft, you might not want to ask about their lives.
Yeah.
You might not ask questions. You might not want to be too close to them.
Wow.
They might be judgmental. They're a little scary. Beggars, you also don't really want to hang out with them, right? Typically, society doesn't. I'm not saying like you don't, right? Same with the local crazy man. They're always held at some sort of distance by society. You don't really ask them, hey, what are you doing here today? Where are you from? Who are you seeing? It's a position in society where a little mystery is expected. And, you know, these are positions where I don't think a lot of people would question if they're talking to kids. The priest, of course, is talking to children. It's a beggar. He's probably trying to hustle that kid. That's a madman. He's got nobody else that listens, so he's talking to the kids. The practitioner of witchcraft, I mean, we never know what they've got brewing, right? Also, it was later discovered that when he wasn't using these random personas to go around and murder children, he was fronting as a non-profit employee gathering donations that he would pocket. Yeah. And at this point, a serial killer had gone from 10 to 15 towns following the same ritual to kill hundreds of little boys. And I'm not the head of the police force, but I don't think it takes a professional to realize, hey, something is going on. But they didn't really put a lot of resources into this. It took the constant pleading of Detective Mark Durham for the higher-ups to even consider categorizing these murders as the work of a serial killer. Detective Mark had nothing but a bunch of guesses and leads. I mean, there was no way to narrow it down, and it seemed like nobody else on the police force even cared. So it's up to Mark to learn everything about serial killers, sexually motivated serial killers, and really any other category this monster would fit into. There would be times where parents were getting fed up, finally, with the amount of missing children in their town. They would gather outside the police station with all the missing kids' families. There were 50 families gathered in one night. And the police would still look at Mark and say, you know, it's concerning, but we should just keep an eye on it. The townspeople were not feeling like that. They were beyond the point of just being concerned. They had dubbed the serial killer the Beast of Colombia. Later, he'd be dubbed the Monster of Genova. And it's wild to me when people know first that something is really wrong before the police know, because technically it's their job, right? But I digress. Now, to add some context, the cops aren't just bad people. I mean, you could argue that they were, I guess, right? But there's a lot more nuance to the whole situation. The Colombian police department as a whole at this point, and probably still now, is criminally underfunded. And the organizational power at the time in Colombia were the cartels. They had considerable interest to keep the police powerless. Each town's police force had a plethora of murder cases on their hands. They didn't have the resources for outside help, serial killer profilers. They didn't even have enough to really fund any evidence or DNA being tested. They just had at least 100 similar murder cases around 8 different towns, so many bodies, and the detectives are walking in circles. They had more than 1,000 names on their suspect list, and not enough resources to narrow that list down or to even start investigating any of them until the night of the cornstalk. The cornstalks caught on fire. The serial killer had been in a cornfield, assaulting and killing another victim when he lit a cigarette and put it out on the ground. It wasn't fully out. The corn stalks around him burst into flames. When the police arrive at the scene, they put the fire out and they see the body of a victim and they know that this is the same serial killer. The MO, the signature, everything is there. And this is clearly a recent crime. And they've got a few pieces of evidence. A pair of shoes and a pair of eyeglasses.
Did he rush away?
Yes. How much information do you think you can get from 2 pieces of evidence like that? Besides the obvious, what their shoe size is and their eye prescription.
Shoes and eyeglasses.
Like if a police officer had your shoes, your eyeglasses, what do you think that they can tell about you? Other than, the generic, his shoe size is this. Let's start with the glasses. Obviously, the suspect wore glasses for poor eyesight. They did have prescriptions in there, but what else can they gather? The style of the glasses suggests that the individual had a liking for older, more classic styles. These styles were probably more popular 10 years ago. So they're thinking he was probably in his prime 10 years ago. So that means he's either in his 20s or typically for men, they consider the 30s the prime. And that was about 10 years ago. So he's in his 40s more likely. Because, you typically have a peak, they call it, in your lifetime, and you almost hang on to your style when you felt like you were at your peak, because you're almost clinging on to that youth, that feeling that you had by clinging on to these styles and designs. So now they believe that the suspect is anywhere between 40 to 45 years old. They could actually tell a lot more with the shoes. Just like the glasses, the shoes can point towards a more accurate picture of the suspect's style, their attire, potentially even profession, because most people don't generally wear work boots unless it's for work-related things. I don't know a lot of random people that own steel-toed boots for fun, and it's a very specific person that wears very specific types of shoes. So those are given, but they can actually tell more than that with your pairs of shoes. Firstly, Lewis was fooling no one. The detectives immediately knew that the killer was wearing a size too big of a shoe to throw them off. His feet imprints were right there. They were much smaller than the shoe. The divots that his feet made inside. So they took his actual shoe size and they started measurements. Shoe size can more or less estimate height. He was about 5'3" to 5'4", which narrows down the search more, because the average man in Colombia is about 5'6". So now we have height and shoe size. Shoes actually tell profilers a lot about someone. So my mom and I have the same exact pair of sneakers and we wear the same exact shoe size. But I can tell when I accidentally slip on my mom's. It's not because they look different or they're more worn or less worn, but the sneakers have molded to my feet, and so have the soles. And you would be surprised at how much your feet can tell about you. When people distribute their weight differently, that can tell what your posture is like, that can tell profilers what you look like, how much you weigh potentially, what kind of styles you would wear, and they can even tell if you have anxious personalities at some points, because anxious people tend to kind of rock back and forth, and there could be signs of that on their shoe soles. So it's very interesting. They analyze the shoes and they realize that the soles at the bottom of his shoes, they're uneven. The left sole looked more worn, which meant this person must walk with a slight irregular rotation of the foot and puts a lot more weight on his left leg. And it's a lot more. So if it was slight, they could wonder if maybe their body proportions lean just more to the left, or if it's become a habitual thing. But because it was such a difference in the soles of the shoes, they're thinking this person must have a noticeable limp.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
And with that, they can kind of guesstimate how he walks. These days, okay, so this was not happening in this case, but in 2023, there's actually podiatrists who work with the police forces. And let's say you have a killer's shoes. They can tell you what the gait is like. They can tell you how they walk. And judging from CCTV, they can match the gait with the shoes. Gait meaning how you walk. Because the wear of the shoes can determine how you walk, and they're really good at analyzing how you walk. So even if the killer's face is not on camera, they can say, these shoes belong to this person based on the way that they walk. Yeah.
That's very cool.
So they know that he has a noticeable limp. The suspect also fled the scene fast, in such a hurry that he left his glasses and his shoes, meaning that he must have been surprised by the fire. But in what situation would he have been surprised by the flames and have his shoes and his glasses off? Shoes are maybe a bit more explainable, but his glasses? They guess accurately that the suspect was taking a nap. He's the type to smoke cigarettes while torturing his victims. He should also be the type to lay down next to a dead victim's body and go to sleep. There was no further explanation on why his glasses would have been off in the first place. Then the fire started while he's napping. He had to flee so quickly that he left his shoes and his glasses, which would likely mean that he's got second-degree burns to his body. And this is when the police put together that the killer has a bad right foot and had been dismembering the right feet of his victims. They also check his prescription. He has pretty bad eyesight, and he was now tending to gauge out the victim's eyeballs. And the killer's signature, he places the victim's private parts into their own mouths. Likely, the killer had been a victim of some sort of abuse or trauma growing up. So now they have a lot more to work with. They thought this killer has to be on the offender list because that just doesn't make sense. Like, you're committing these level of crimes, there's no way. But that registered offender list consists of more than 5,200 names. So that's more than 1,000. Their suspect list was originally 1,000. They eliminate all the names that had been charged with assaulting girls because the victims are all boys. That's 1,600 names left. Then they took off anyone younger than 40. That's now 95 names. Then they eliminated anyone that was shorter or taller than 5'3", 5'4". And now they had a list of 25 names. And they believed one of these 25 people were going to seek medical attention soon for their burns. They were right.
Wow, they got so good all of a sudden.
All of a sudden, yeah. They were right. Lewis had burns all over his body. He forced himself to run on foot for 6 hours despite his burns, which I don't say that sympathetically. I'm saying that to emphasize this guy really, really did not want to get caught. When he stops running, he realizes, I've got second to third degree burns all over my body. Second degree burns, they look a little bit blistered. Third degree burns, they look like charred wood, or they looked really white, like cooked white meat. And it's not as painful in the immediate time. It'll later probably feel like hell, but the nerve endings are typically destroyed initially for third degree burns.
Where was he burned?
All over his leg and like kind of the left side of his body. Yes. You know, Lewis, like all other serial killers that we've talked about, he had a very strong self-preservation mindset. He knew that he couldn't go to the hospital for his burns, but he had to get something. He went to a vet clinic, and lied, said that he had gotten into an accident in his fireplace, gave this very elaborate story, offered to pay for treatment. They did not ask questions. They treated his burns. December of that year, every single newspaper had the same explosive headline plastered all over it. The Beast of Colombia caught. The killer's face and name were front page on every major publication in town, and the shameless killer had the audacity to deny all the crimes that led to him. He had an injury on his right leg that caused him to limp. The shoe quite literally fit, and he was exactly 5'4" inches tall. He had a history of abusing minors. He loves cheap brandy, and he's sitting there and he's like, I'm not the Beast of Colombia. And they're like, you are despicable, dude. The Beast who had, on average, killed 2 to 3 kids a month for almost a decade, and now he's sitting there looking cops in the eye saying, that wasn't me. What? While the Beast was in custody, Detective Mark received a phone call. 4 more bodies were found, and they were recent. They were killed in the same way, same MO, same signature, as the Beast of Colombia. The person sitting in prison about to be tried for the serial killings was not their beast. Don't get me wrong, he was and he should be behind bars, but this was not Luis Garabito. They took him off the list and went back now to a list of 24 names. Detective Mark went to talk to each of the 24 families of the suspects. One of the sisters of the suspects did notice something strange recently. She said, you know what? My brother did stop by a few days ago and he told me to hold on to his little bag and not look into it. And I haven't looked into it. They look into it, it's newspaper clippings of the crimes.
That's how they caught him?
Yeah.
Huh.
Luis Garabito. Mark looks into this guy. At 15, he was arrested for the first time for trying to assault S.A., a 7-year-old at a train station. He was caught and let go. He had actually been brought in years before for murder, torture, assault, and beheading of a kid, but they said that they didn't have any other evidence, so they just let him go. And you would think that since he had already been brought in for such a similar crime, that once these serial killer investigations started taking place, people would be like, oh my goodness, that's the guy, right? They didn't. He was not. Outside of the crimes, he managed to live a normal-appearing life. He had a few girlfriends, never had children of his own, but his girlfriends who lived with him had children from previous relationships. They never noticed anything odd about him, they said. They said that he was really good with kids, actually. And even after breaking up, sometimes he would still send money. He was very nice, they said. As Detective Mark is investigating, a call is made to his unit. A boy had been discovered in town, completely shaken up, and he said that a man tried to assault him. He rushes over, puts the boy into his patrol car, and they start driving around looking for this man because they're like, this is going to be the Beast of Colombia. And they see something straight out of a horror movie. As they're driving, they see a man walking in the middle of the road, and their patrol car is loud. As they're driving up towards this man, whose back is facing them, this man does not move, does not run faster. He just keeps walking at the same steady, slow pace, blocking the way, not even looking back to see who or what is behind him. And the kid is like, that's him. That's him. They pull up, and they ask the man for his name. And he very calmly says, oh, my name is Bonifacio? Yeah, that's my name. Okay. It's a very specific name, Bonifacio. What was your last name? Bonifacio Marrero. Very interesting. While the partner is asking generic questions like, what are you doing? Why are you walking? You're walking to the next town over? That's 55 miles away. You got lost? Where did you get lost? Detective Mark looks down and sees scarred and healing burns all over the left side of his body. His weight is heavily distributed to the left side. He's wearing glasses and suspiciously looks identical to the suspect photo of Luis Garabito. He was finally arrested. He didn't try to run, he didn't try to fight, but he did insist that he was Bonifacio. Okay? Which was not the smartest thing, because Bonifacio Marrero was a well-known politician from the next town over, and he kept up this whole shtick of being a well-known politician, even though he looked nothing like the well-known politician, and he looked more like Luis Garabito, and he's like, I don't know who that guy is. They brought in Detective Mark, and Detective Mark is kind of like your quintessential detective that you would see in those sleepy small-town murder thriller books. He said that he put his whole life on hold for this case. He sat down in front of Luis, looked him in the eye and said, I have followed every footstep. I have seen every single victim. I have breathed every breath that you took for the past 2 years, and now we finally caught you and it's over. Luis calmly asked if he could pray, walked to the corner of the room, and started sobbing while begging for forgiveness. He also confessed to 221 murders. At one point during the confession, he leaned over and vomited into the interrogation trash can. Yeah. He also said in the same breath, as he's confessing to the murders, he said, really, my only problem is my leg. My psychic health is very good. I've never had psychic problems. I'm assuming he meant psychiatric. Most of his interrogations, at least the ones that our Spanish researchers could dig up, it's of Luis recounting his crimes. But there are certain parts that we haven't covered that kind of stand out. At one point, the investigator asked him why he decapitated the boys, and he said, I don't know, because I made those decisions. Possibly it was because the boys didn't suffer and they died more smoothly, that's why. He's stating that he was trying to help the boys pass in a softer way. This is the man that disemboweled his victims while they were alive, so. He also kept saying, I don't want people to look at me like I'm a monster. I'm a human being. Yeah, Well, he could live out the rest of his human being life in a Colombian prison then. He was sentenced for 162 murders. The courts counted up all the years that he would get for each individual case, and it came down to 1,853 years and 9 days. To give context, the United States of America has only been around for 247 years. This man is being sentenced to 1,853 years. But Colombia has a max prison sentence. Colombia is one of the countries where they believe that even criminals should have the right to life. Life is sacred, and these criminals deserve to have a light at the end of the tunnel. And to condemn someone to a life behind bars without hope is inhumane. Colombia has something called sentence unification. If you are sentenced to multiple crimes, then you will only serve the term that's the worst, that's the longest. It's basically serving your sentences concurrently rather than consecutively. So we kind of have that in the US. So in Colombia, if you get sentenced to 3 crimes, 2 years for one, 5 years for one, and 6 months for one, instead of spending 7.5 years in prison, you'll just spend 5 years because it's your harshest sentence. And just like that, 1,853 years turned into 40 years. 40. 40 for the worst serial killings in history, where he kidnapped hundreds of children, tortured them, dismembered them, disemboweled them, assaulted them, decapitated them, used their bodies for satanic rituals that we don't even know because he won't talk about. 40 years. But people are like, okay, let's have some hope, because Colombian prisons are notorious for being harsh. And Luis was sentenced to the maximum security prison in Colombia, probably one of the worst in the entire country, which apparently the prison itself was inspired by the US penitentiary system. So there's that, but it's really, really bad. People have stated that the first thing you'll notice before you even walk into the prison is the whole smell. I mean, the place stinks of urine and feces to the point where even if you walk in covering your mouth and nose, your eyes start to water because of the stench. There's only running water for about 8 to 15 minutes a day, and only on the first floor. Now, there's no guarantee that you're allowed to go to the first floor when water is running. If you don't have a first floor cell, more likely than not, you get access to no running water. It's really bad. Since there's no running water, there's no toilets. So the prisoners are forced to relieve themselves in plastic bags. I'm talking both types, urine and feces, into plastic bags. But if they leave these plastic bags in their cells, it starts to stink up the entire cell. So they toss the plastic bag through the bars of their cell into the communal space beneath. And more often than not, these bags plop and they splatter to the ground. And since water is never on, prisoners basically have water rations. They have water deliveries where the prisoners are forced to line up, shoulder to shoulder. They're stiff, it's tense. They've got empty jugs in one hand, and they've got, the guards will pour their water into those empty jugs. And then in the other hand, they just have like a knife out in the open, an improvised weapon, like a shank that they made in prison. Because usually the violent outbreaks happen during water deliveries. The cells themselves are jam-packed with prisoners. Even the hallways of the jail are filled with mattresses because of how many people are in there. It's really bad. And they are exposed to the elements in most cases. In the maximum security tower where Luis is a prisoner, they are allowed out of their cells for 1 hour a day. The conditions in there are so bad that some prisoners have taken to sewing their mouths shut as a protest against the horrid conditions. Others have made these cocoons out of their bed sheets. So they make these hammocks. And I guess the window bars are enough for them to get out of their window. But they can't really escape because I guess there's guards everywhere and it's completely isolated, right? So they make these little hammocks that they tie on the cell window bars. They get out of the building and they're just basically dangling off the side of the building, but 4 stories tall. Now the guards, they don't like it. So they start cutting little incisions into the prisoners' bed sheets so that if they try to do this, their bed sheets will fall apart and they will fall 4 stories, potentially to their death. One volunteer stated that he saw multiple men scaling the inner wall of the jail, climbing from the ground floor to the 5th floor. Someone was pulling down bed sheets so that they could climb up while balancing water jugs around their neck. It's because the top dogs of the 5th floor wanted some water, so the bottom people had to go fetch water. Many of them would slip and fall to their deaths, and the guards would not even look. Nobody cared. Ironically, outside the prison, there is a fish pond with a constant stream of running water poured into it. It's interesting. Even visitors were not safe. In the conjugal visit room, which is where prisoners are allowed to spend alone time with partners, it's typically filled with blood and used condoms. And recently, in a separate Colombian prison, but similar, the drain pipes were clogged. Plumbers came to work on it. They found the remains of 100 people in the drains of a prison. Inmates, visitors, nobody was safe. And while he's in here, Luis, people thought maybe he's gonna get killed in prison. I mean, a lot of people were hopeful that would be the cause because they didn't want him out in 40 years, that's for sure, right? So a lot of people were hopeful, but he was treated kind of like a king. He got his own isolated cell because this is such a high-profile case. The guards were scared that if he was murdered, their jobs would be on the line. So he had like his own personal bodyguard the whole time. There were journalists lining up to interview him, and he was like a picky little princess. He would charge a big sum of money to be interviewed, and that's why we don't have a lot of interviews of this guy. And most of the time, he would just ramble on about nothing in his interviews. It's very hard to follow. He never provides much new information that could help bring closure to families. He just starts lying in his interviews at one point. He straight up claimed in an interview that he never essayed a single victim and that he does not consider himself a
Yo no violé ninguna víctima, no me considero un violador. ¿Sí me entiende? Cometí los homicidios. Bueno, llámese como se llamen.
He also stated he thinks that he should be able to get out of prison because it's just not fair. You know, he's learned his lessons and he's not a because he has erectile dysfunction, and if you need proof, you should just go ask his ex-girlfriends because he could never get it up with them. Like, this is literally his thought process. And he's like, I need to be let out of prison because I've got life goals now. The journalists are like, what's your life goal? I'm going to be a congressman and I want to fight for the rights of children. I cannot make this up. He also goes on a rant about how he sees himself in some of the most unsavory dictators and mass murderers. They went to his cell and it was decorated with posters of Hitler, Mother Teresa, Gandhi, and Princess Diana. It was a very, very strange mix of people. Another interesting thing to note, one journalist who interviewed Luis directly in jail said, there was something about his eyes where I felt like they were sucking the energy out of me. It was terrifying. But it gets worse. Luis receives multiple sentence reductions, the largest of which took off almost half of his sentence because he did a work-study program in jail. Yeah, with that reduction amongst others, Luis's sentence was now 22 years, and he was scheduled to get out of prison in 2023. Luis was up for release in 2023, and everyone was terrified, except for a Facebook group where he had 170 fans that just loved him, could not wait for him to be free. And eventually, October 12th, 2023.
Last month?
Luis Garavito was pronounced dead in prison.
What?
He had leukemia and a very aggressive form of eye cancer, which a lot of people believe to be karma because he had bad eyesight. He gouged out the victim's eyes, and now he was dead from eye cancer.
Wait, is that true?
Yeah, leukemia and eye cancer.
It wasn't foul play?
There are some suspicions, but
So he's about to come out.
yeah.
And he
But
died of...
yes, he also didn't really want to come out. There's mixed conversations about did he even want to get out. So a lot of people were trying to boycott him coming out. So they were writing letters to congressmen, local officials, to the president, and everybody was doing everything in their power to make sure that this man does not get out on the street. Some sources made it seem like he wanted to get out on the street and he's fighting with these judicial people. But